Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Josh Dyson. Josh has most recently served as the headmaster at the Classical School of Wichita in Wichita, Kansas. In December 2024, he launched, under God's guidance, to start the C5 Urban School Initiative, for which he serves as the executive director. C5 will launch Hope Academy Wichita this coming fall. Additionally, Josh serves on the board of our very own Classic Learning Test as an academic advisor, and also on the board as an Arete Fellow for the Society for Classical Learning. He and his wife, Julie, have been married since 2006, and they have 4 children, Deacon, Noel, Daisy, and Lucy. And I'm so excited to have him on the podcast today. Josh, welcome.
It's great to be with you, my friend.
Honestly, it's like I haven't talked to Josh in a long, long time. Let's get him on the podcast so we can catch up. No, that's part of the reason, but it's also you're doing incredible things, and we're going to get to C5, Hope Academy Wichita, really life-changing things you're doing. But let's start, as we always do on the Anchored Podcast, by talking about our guest's own educational background. Tell us a little bit about your K-12 experience. Were you public school educated, homeschool, private? What was it like?
Yeah, I got it all. I did the whole thing. Started out homeschool, ended up going to a private school, about 40, 50 kids in my class for 8th and 9th grade, Lutheran school in Houston. And then finished up at a giant public school, graduated with 830 kids in Deer Park, Texas. Yeah, wow. So did the whole thing.
Wow, that was still in Texas. Did you go into higher ed? Like, I'm going to pursue education, or what was that journey like, kind of into education?
Yeah, pretty early on, I felt a call to be involved in ministry. So when I was in high school, even thought that was a direction that I was going to be going, was toward ministry, and a lot of people affirmed that. Spent a little bit of time overseas in Costa Rica doing some work there, and then ended up at Houston. Houston Baptist University is the school I went to. It's now called Houston Christian University. Right. So did biblical languages and Christianity was my undergraduate there. Ended up being a minister at my church, youth minister, and did some adult ministry during that time. Before then heading on to seminary at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, in Louisville, Kentucky. So spent a couple years there, and then it was really when I was in Louisville that was torn between academics and church ministry. So that's kind of the short version of how at least got to that point.
Yeah. When did you first kind of tap into school administration? Was that before Wichita? Was that when you came to Classical School Wichita?
Yeah, so I ended up after when I was in Louisville, we ended up moving back to Houston. My son was born, so I wasn't able to finish my degree there at Southern, and I took a job at Houston's First Baptist Academy. So it's at First Baptist Houston at their pre-K through 8 school as a chaplain, and I taught Bible there. So was mostly doing teaching, and really fell in love with teaching at that point. Fell in love with Christian education at that school, especially for children who were in that middle school age. Before that, I was just thought that college, higher ed was the way to go. Right. But being able to spend time with those 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders, so what a tremendous opportunity for life change that we have with these kids. So through that time, and doing chaplain work, and then somehow ended up doing trip planning for First Baptist Academy. Planned our local trip to San Antonio and Austin for 7th graders. Then ended up planning the 8th grade tour of New York, DC, Philadelphia. And oddly enough, it was through trip planning that I found my knack for administration, and was like, this is actually what I love doing. And that was the beginning of the administrative journey.
Wow. That is fascinating. Through trip planning, huh?
Yeah.
I think it takes someone with a just a heart for middle school kids. The number of times I interviewed, right out of college, wanted to go into teaching, and the number of times people said anything but middle school. But then every now and then you got the ones that said, I would love to teach like junior high or middle school. there's only two types of people in the world, I think,
Right.
and you were the one that embraced that.
Yeah. Well, you're hired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not what I was saying when I went into the role.
I'm
It
sure.
was a little bit more of a, all right, well, I guess I'll try this out.
Right.
But it kind of grew on me over time and had to catch the vision for it.
Right. Yeah. Especially now when you're going to, the Hillsdales, the Grove cities, and to recruit teachers, like 99% of them want to teach, senior class literature and philosophy.
Exactly.
Like, well, let's back off a little bit. When was the first, I guess, Houston First Baptist, not a classical school, a Christian school, not a classical school. Yep. When were you first exposed to and kind of then got immersed into classical education?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Louisville, there was some, exposure there through Highlands Latin.
Yeah,
I was never, at Highlands, but had friends who were very involved there. So piqued my interest during that time. And then when I was at First Baptist Academy, again, fell in love with Christian education, but really desired for something more. Wasn't sure what that was at the time. Ended up and some people may or may not know Dr. Rodney Marshall, who started Coram Deo there in Dallas, Flower Mound, a number of years ago. So Rodney Marshall ended up being the interim head of school at our school, First Baptist Academy. So we had pretty much the full year that he was there, and he really took me under his wings. Of course, being a founder of a classical school, he's a wealth of knowledge, very well connected. And then he sent me and my principal, our middle school principal, to the Society for Classical Learning conference in 2013 in San Antonio. And whenever hearing James K. Smith and Louis Marcos, present their talks, and I mean, I was hooked at that point. Yeah. This is where I want to be.
Wow. That is, it's hard to, when you hear Louis Marcos, not to get hooked.
Yeah. And then Rodney encouraged me to get, go back and get some education to get in, in the classical world. So I went back to Houston Baptist, started working on Masters of Liberal Arts there. So it was in that program for a little while, still at First Baptist Academy. And then there became friends with Neil Anderson. I know a lot of people know Neil down in Houston. So we hit it off. And then, from there, connection to connection, ended up in administration at a classical Christian school.
Wow. I think the first time I talked to you on the phone, you were still the COO, I think, of that was your official title, right, at Wichita before you became
operations, is what we
director of
called it,
operations. There we go. Yeah, not quite the C-suite yet. That's fine. But I do remember that like vividly, pacing around a table because I think it was my first year at CLT. Still a little nervous. Phone call. It went pretty well. You guys signed up.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah, we're excited. Yeah, director of operations there for 4 years at classical school and Wade Ortego was the head of school at that time. He's at Ambrose now. And then when Wade took off, then I assumed the head of school role and did that for almost 7 years.
Man, and that it's a fantastic school and what you've built there and continued, obviously. Just great people. One of our good friends, Kevin Thames, he's really become a close friend. Just incredible school, growing it, scaling it. But I always love about schools that you grow and scale, not losing sight of their mission, right?
Yeah.
Not, no mission drift. In fact, doubling down through COVID. So it's been really beautiful to see. So I was. I'm
going to interrupt you real quick.
Yeah, of course.
So that story about being sent to San Antonio, the SCL. Kevin was the other person that was sent, that Rodney sent me and Kevin together to SCL because Kevin was my middle school principal at that time. And then when I moved to classical school in Wichita, I ended up recruiting Kevin to come to Wichita to spend, was there for the next 10 years with us.
Wow.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no, that is when it comes to pens and bagpipes, Kevin Thames is the man you need to know.
Lots of things. He's the man.
Lots of things. Yeah. That's the thing about the classical. There's so many really, really interesting human beings, and so a few months ago I got a text from you and you said that you're going to move on from classical school of Wichita, and there's a transition plan in place and all that, and you're going to start something new. And that's what want to talk to you about today. You are the executive director of the C5 Urban School Initiative.
Yeah.
Tell our audience, what I mean. Obviously, I'm sure it was a lot of prayers, a lot of conversations with your family, but you're leaving, a pretty good role at Classical School of Wichita, right, to start something completely new.
Yeah.
So what led you to that? And then, of course, tell us C5. What does that stand for? What's the vision and mission of the organization?
Yeah. No, those are, as schools continue to grow, and a number of us are in schools that are in moments of significant growth, and really trying to understand what does that mean for our school and for our leadership and those things. And that puts, I think, us as leaders into similar spaces of asking those questions of, who's God calling me to be? Where's God calling me to be? Where do I fit into this environment? And so about a little over a year ago, really dove into that a time of discernment, and really just went before the Lord, asking big questions, like what is it that you want for me? What is it you want for my family? What you're calling upon my life? And I think sometimes we ask God to, hey, have a couple options for you. Will you kind of lean, which way do you lean toward? But really try to go before God, just completely open postured, and say, hey, all right, I just want to open up space completely to you. Whatever you want, God, that's where we want to be. And the big question that I asked, through that time was, God, what is your heart for our city? And we sensed that his response was, all right, well, for one, Josh, it's about time you asked, what my heart is, and what my desire is. And then secondly is, my heart is the same that it's always been, and is throughout all Scripture very clear, that he has a heart for the poor and for the forgotten and the lonely and the fatherless and orphan, the widow. So when we heard, God say that, we're like, okay, well, let's do it. Let's figure out what does it mean to be able to serve those people. And what is it that God has given us? He's given us a beautiful education. And I've really come to see that in our culture, especially the poor, they have so many needs that are met. Food, shelter, mental health services, all kinds of things. So we try, what is it that's not met? What is the bread, so to speak, of our day and our culture? And it's like, man, education is the bread. That is the thing that the poor still don't have access to. Really rich, high quality, excellent education. I mean, if you start, looking at the statistics around literacy in particular, it really is tragic, and what that means for the future of kids who are not able to actually read in a meaningful way. So yeah, it's like we just like, all right, God, let's go after this and see what that means. So that's how, that's the short story.
Wow, that is amazing. And from that to, you could have probably tagged on to a ministry, right? But then to say, you know what, I'm gonna start something new that does not exist in its current form. So tell me, C5, kind of the name, the what does it stand for, and what led you to kind of that name, and maybe kind of the mission and vision of the organization itself.
Yeah. So how we ended up, with C5, is these 5 C's, and the 5 C's of C5 are classical, Christian, in the church, in the community being served, for the Great Commission. So what we, want to see is those 5 things, where they intersect and where they come together. So that's how we ended up with a name. Not necessarily the most creative of names. It's just like, oh, here's 5 things. So C5 is where we ended up.
I figured, because you hear sometimes the 3 C's, we're collaborative, Christian, but C5, and it's probably going to lead to a lot of questions, right? Like, what does it stand for? Glad you asked. So obviously classical Christian. A lot of our listeners probably get that, for the Great Commission. I love that. Go out there, right?
Yep.
In the church. That is, there are obviously some classical Christian schools that are church, but many are not. So what was kind of the thinking behind that?
Yeah, and I chose to even this fall we were in the nave of our church, Incarnation Anglican Church. That's a little shout out there. And this is where our first school will be held. So Hope Academy will meet here starting in the fall at Incarnation. As we continue to wrestle with this, and it's so encouraging to see various people wrestling with us. I mean, even I think today or tomorrow, Alcuin fellows are gathering to wrestle with this very question. Because so many of our schools are independent and are essentially operate as parachurch ministries, are not connected to, or not ministries maybe at all, but historically the church has been the one that really has been the pioneer of education, has paved the way, especially for what we now call public education. I mean, the church was the one who led that, right? And up until 100, 150 years ago, that's where those schools existed. Nobody would have considered educating, especially the poor, until the church came along to do that. So a lot of what we want to do is there are some entities that have maintained this. I mean, the Catholic Church has done a fairly good job of seeking to hold on to that calling of education. The Lutherans have done a fairly good job of trying to hold on to that, but by and large, a lot of evangelical churches have not held on to, especially K-12 education being a priority. And so what we want to do is call back, like, no, the church historically, this is the space that the church has been in. There would be no public schools if it was not the church that stepped into their neighborhoods to educate these children. So a lot of it is a calling back of the church to that role. There's also, especially in the work that we're seeking to do, which is inner city impoverished communities. There's ways that we really need the church, probably, and maybe more radically than others do. The church leaders are still respected. And a lot of these communities are very involved in reaching, the needs of families in these communities. Like, hey, can we partner together with you in some of these things? But maybe the most significant of all is the spiritual side of all this. Especially as we look at, if we understand what's happening in our culture to be a spiritual battle, then education is one of those fronts the battle is taking place on. And if we're going to enter into dark places, places that there are strongholds there in place, then we need a spiritual power. And I believe that Jesus Christ gave a promise to the church whenever he said, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. It's like that's the promise that we need if we're going to be charging into dark places, which is what we intend to do. We intend to go into dark places, and I don't want to do that alone. So it's like, all right, church, we need you to step up into that spiritual role and the promise the gates of hell will not prevail against.
Oh, man. I love that. I love that. I for our regular listeners, just I don't know how many weeks ago, just a couple of weeks ago, maybe, I had Sarah Osborne on the podcast from College of the Ozarks, and we talk a lot about is classical education for all. I mean, we're in this next phase of growth of classical schools, and she talked more about students with disabilities or reading challenges, and we're obviously a logocentric movement, right? And so, and she was saying that there's some work we can do, and when I'm thinking about what you're doing. There are not a lot of classical Christian schools that go into the inner city, and those are great schools. And for a long time, I mean, they had to establish themselves. The reputation is right, and it's probably a little bit unfair, right, that those classical Christian schools, they're only kind of in the suburbs, where the upper middle class white families live, and we know that's not entirely true. And of course, you have your classical charter schools that are oftentimes in so at least bringing that aspect of classical. I think the one school that oftentimes we point to in a classical Christian school that does it is Hope Academy in the Twin Cities in Russ Gregg. So I have to ask, right? Hope Academy, Wichita, is there a connection? And was kind of sure Russ is a friend of yours.
Yeah.
Was there kind of a model that you wanted to copy, so to speak?
Yeah, Russ has played a tremendous role in our discernment. So I've had a number of calls with Russ and texts at times, of uh, some of those like, "Am I crazy?"
Yes, keep
phone
going.
calls. Yeah, he's like, "Yes, you are." Yeah, yeah. It was actually in a visit to Minneapolis, and Russ let us, ended up going and stayed, a couple nights in his home while we spent a couple days there at Hope Academy at their doing their Hope Plunge,
Yeah.
which definitely put a plug in for that for anybody that is interested in this work is go spend a couple days doing the Hope Plunge. Um, so it was through that time that that really sealed the deal, so to speak, for me that this is what I need to go do. Um, and what's really cool about Russ, what they're doing in Minneapolis is unbelievable. Right, 650 kids being served in the inner city of Minneapolis. But more than that is they are actively helping a number of schools get going and supporting and networking through what is called the Spreading Hope Network.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure exactly what our title is, if member or affiliate is with Spreading Hope, but we are definitely very much in that and working with them through all that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, is it going to look different, right? When you think about,
Yeah,
we're bringing classical Christian education to a community that has probably not heard of classical Christian, might not respond to it in the way again other populations might. I'm assuming going to inner city, it's going to be poorer families. I would
yep,
assume a higher minority population than probably in the suburbs. So one, obviously, you're bringing that to those families. What has the reception been so far, and what's kind of the quote, I'm a marketing guy, right? The marketing, the messaging that you're approaching. Because my assumption is talking about you're going to read Aristotle is probably not going to immediately persuade people.
yeah. Yeah, those are great questions, and probably can break that into quite a number of different questions there. Yeah, thinking about the messaging is a big one, right? There is some baggage associated with the term classical,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't it's not always received the best, especially in some minority populations. So we've tried to navigate through that. There are some schools that have abandoned the term classical altogether, and not necessarily it, but maybe that could be the right decision in their context. We haven't made that decision at this point, but it's not really our leading. We don't lead with that
Yeah.
side of things. I try to think of some other creative language that may be like so. Rich education is one that I've tried to lean into, or just excellence. Excellent education has been one that we tried to lean into. Largely, also, our leading thing hasn't, it's not Aristotle, those kind of things. At this moment, it really is literacy.
Yeah.
And of course, we're starting at a younger population where literacy is key for them, right? If by third grade they're not reading on level, the implications of that are tragic. So that's largely what we're selling on right now is, hey, in our where we're zoned right now. So in Incarnation Anglican Church, the neighborhood that we're in right now, which is a low income neighborhood, this where the kids that are zoned to the local elementary school, right, it's 12.1% of third graders that are reading at proficient level.
Twelve
Uh,
point one
12.1%,
percent.
right, at proficient level. Proficient level is the level at which they say if you're reading this level, then you should be able to make it in college.
Yeah.
So, which even more tragic than that is for African American children that are zoned to this school in fourth grade, it's less than 5% that are reading at a proficient level. I mean, 1 in 20 of those kids. I mean,
Wow.
like it or not, our culture, even with all the screens and all the technology and that kind of stuff, literacy is still we're still very much a literacy culture, and if you don't have literacy,
Yeah.
you're not going to make it. And there are exceptions to that, of course, and there are whole cultures that are not, literacy cultures, and and that's great. They're more oral cultures, and that's wonderful. I'm not talking about those
Right.
cultures. We're talking about the American culture that we're in right now. Very much is a literacy based culture. So that's largely how we've really focused on that. So we're putting kind of all of our eggs in the basket of saying, hey, we want to demonstrate to you
Yeah.
that we can get all of our students up, 100% students to reading at a proficient level. And then we hope through that to be able to start building trust with those families to say, hey, we kind of help, you walked with us, we walked with you through this process. Will you continue to walk with us as we, start to explore, right? And when you think about literacy, maybe there's some ideas of what that means for jobs and those kind of things. But we,
Sure.
trust us as we want to help to open up a world, of the classical tradition and virtue formation and what's true, good, and beautiful. As we've leaned heavily on the W.B. Du Bois, quote,
Yeah.
it's just the end of education is not to make men into carpenters, but to make carpenters into men.
Man.
So,
Oh, I
yeah.
love that. I think we have CLT bookmarks for
You do
that
have
one. It's
one.
one of
Yeah, I
my,
have it
yeah,
somewhere. Yeah.
nice.
I think that's what initially is like. I love that one. I'm going to make that a.
Oh, hey, we didn't come up. I mean, the design maybe, but no,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah, I read on your website, and it really, I mean, it resonated with me. I was at a charter school, and it was lottery enrollment, so we had students of wealthier families, and we had students from the trailer park down the street, and a lot of them sure came for the classical piece of it, but the number of families that we talked to that just said, I want my child to feel safe when they're at school, right? To be,
Yes.
and I read that on your website, kind of your commitment. Your child will be,
Yeah.
I think it's a safe and joyous learning environment.
Yeah.
I think that coupled with your child will be loved on, right? We will love your child. I mean, it seems so quote unquote simple, right? But it's just probably not their experience whatsoever. So it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these kids, I mean, unfortunately, of course, it's easy for me to think of safety, and I think of things like, safe spaces and those kind of stuff. But we're talking about a population where it may literally be physical safety that
Yeah.
we're talking about, right? I mean, it's really unbelievable what a number of these students experience on a daily basis or weekly basis that, or at least for myself, I can only speak for myself, are so far outside of what my experience has been.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and we're not talking, I disagree with what you said. I need my safe space. We're talking, I mean, we're physically feeling like we're not safe. So, no, that commitment is important, and I'm sure it's going to resonate with those families. What about cost, right? I mean, private Christian schools, usually cost is the major factor. Now you're taking that to lower income families. How are you navigating that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, when I went to Minneapolis, to see Russ at Hope Academy, one of the questions he asked me, and I'm probably maybe stealing Russ's little tagline here, so sorry, Russ, if you can't use this anymore. But sitting there in his office, and he asked me, he said, and whenever you came, you're looking at options to get, up to Minneapolis. Did you quote some, charter jets? Did you quote, leasing a private jet to get up here? I was like, no, that's ridiculous. Of course, I didn't, look at a private jet. I just got on Expedia or whatever, United,
Right.
and found the cheapest thing that I could find. And he said that's exactly what you got. People that are in these lower income. When you start talking about private school, you might as well be talking about chartering a jet to get somewhere, right? I mean, that's that's not what you do. So yeah, it's a huge thing to even get into the thinking like that. This is something to consider, and how are we going to do that? So we largely will follow the model that that Hope Minneapolis has set. By radically subsidizing that through sponsorships, through donors. We have a tax credit program here in Kansas that we're hoping to take advantage of, and then Lord willing, we think in a couple years that we'll have education savings accounts here in
Yeah.
Kansas. So what we're trying to do is get set up now, get the infrastructure in place, and something that can be replicated in place, so that when that hits, that'll be fuel on the fire. And that, because a lot of the criticism of ESAs or any school choice thing is that only, a certain demographic is benefiting from those. So, for once, like, all right, well, we'll address that by, prioritizing, a low income demographic. And then, of course, another issue with the school choice, what's happening in school choice is the schools. If there's no schools available, then it doesn't matter how much money you have to go
That's
spend
right.
in the school. So it's like, all right, well, let's address that need by creating schools and a network of schools that can be intentionally replicated to meet an influx of students whenever those things
How
happen. So,
exciting. Yeah, and
yeah,
I
so
know
that's
from
our dream is.
several of the ESA legislation that was passed, especially the rollout, the first year, it's going to mostly be for lower income families, and so it's not even like you'd have to wait. You'd have something established already, and I'm
Yep.
sure part of it is just the education again of the family that no, that's something you can use for an already affordable private school in your community. You don't even have to, you know, take the bus or go into the suburbs to get that private school education.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things, as we've, been learning a lot just about poverty, the different ways that, people operate differently in impoverished systems, are just so different, and we don't realize that. But because most
Yeah.
of us are middle class kind of families, I assume that probably most of the listeners are middle class families. Even talk about the amount of paperwork that it takes to get into a school, the application process. I mean, all online access and references from various people. Like these, it's just barrier in place. And some of those, I mean, it's good to have standards and barriers in place, but as we're thinking about, hey, if we're going to be able to reach a demographic that is very challenged in these things, we have to get really serious, not just by saying, hey, here's some money available, because a lot of schools do that. But what we've certainly learned is that money is only a part of the issue. There's a lot of barriers that stand in place, and I mean, some of those simple as how do you get to the school, right? Which is part of what our dream is, to be able to put a neighborhood school. Every neighborhood would have a school within walking distance, so that we can address that issue head on. Say, hey, here it is in your neighborhood, and that's where that one C of in the community. Instead of having the posture of, hey, why don't you come to us? We think following the incarnation of our Lord, right, is we want to go to you and take
Yeah.
this to the people we want to serve.
I absolutely love that. And it sounds like, from the way you're speaking, like you're going to start with one this fall with Hope
Yep.
Academy Wichita, but that's not the end of it.
Yeah.
So talk to us briefly, just kind of, Lord willing, what's kind of the plan the next 3 to 5 years? How many schools are you hoping to open?
Yeah, so our hope, Hope Academy,
Right.
Wichita will be the first one here. We'll start with junior kinder through third grade, hoping to have somewhere between 8 and 15 students. Yes,
Awesome.
the model we're using is it doesn't have to be big. We're trying to say, hey, can we get in, get in small, but, treating high priority on nimbleness, on flexibility, on replicability. And then, the year after that, I'm hoping, we're in active conversation with churches, pastors. They say, hey, whenever we get this going, come and see it, right? And then
Yep.
imagine, can you do this in your space? And if you came to our church, it's not a big church. We don't have all the things. We have very limited a number of classrooms. We don't. We literally don't have a parking lot. Right. So, but that's part of what the vision we're casting is. Hey, if we can do it here, you can do it at your church, right? And what essentially what I go tell those pastors is, hey, I know that a lot of you want to do this. A lot of you want to start church, our schools, but it's so overwhelming to think about all the logistics going into that. So we want to take the logistical side of that and make it actually fairly simple thing for you to do. It's still going to have a good amount of buy-in required, but can we lower the threshold that churches say, all right, maybe we can do this in partnership with C5. So we hope to have a couple churches next year that'll be willing to let us start expanding into their spaces. And then we want to have around 12 to 13 of these schools in the next 5 to 10 years, in the elementary ages in particular, and then essentially operate like a school district operates, by having, like middle school, maybe they feed into, and then a high school that can serve the whole city. So that's our desire for Wichita. We want to help, those around the nation and even the world. I mean, it's been really amazing to see how the Lord has started to open up some opportunities with movements in Asia. And I think that there's some things that we can serve them, but I'm also learning there's a lot that they have to offer us that we can learn about, education and being creative and spaces and approaches that can help us think outside the box too.
Well, what an incredible initiative, Josh. Other than, of course, our audience's prayers, what are other ways we can support and serve? We'll obviously put the websites in the show notes, but if you want to share with us kind of the website of the initiative and the school and how people could get involved.
Yeah. If they go, to the website, and there's a tab on there, support C5, and it has the pitch deck on there of,
Nice.
What our vision is and what our needs are through that. Whether it's helping sponsor, getting curriculum or teaching resources, or help sponsor a child to be able to afford to come here. Right. Our tuition is $9,000 per year at this point. Almost no family can afford that who's coming to our school, so we are radically depending upon those who have a heart for this to go into the inner city to help be part of that. So anybody who would love to be part of it would love to talk with them.
Amazing. Well, Josh, we have one final question. You told me in the pre-chat that we had that's the hardest one for you, and you promised that you'd be disciplined and only pick one book. But the question we always ask at the end of the Anchored podcast, if there's one book or one text that has had really a great impact on your life, which one would it be and why?
Yeah, the one that whenever you started to get me thinking about that, Henry Nouwen came to mind. And there's a few options that came up. The first Nouwen book was the one on the Return of the Prodigal Son, which is I think the first book that I remember weeping while reading it. The way the heart was really impactful. But most recently, Nouwen, I think the book's called In His Name, which is on leadership. And Henry, if you know Henry Nouwen, you just imagine what he would write about leadership, and it's pretty much exactly that. And it's so convicting about having the right orientation and leadership and posture and humility. It really is. It's very short, very simple read, but it's so rich and good, especially as a leader. Highly, highly commend it.
Well, Josh, I am just so in awe at your courage in following the Lord's lead, and I remember first time talking to Russ Gregg, and I see a lot of similarities, and I can just see the passion and the joy. And I know, of course, Russ, when he talks about the great feast, right, that we spread. I mean, I always get goosebumps thinking about that. And it's just such important work that you're doing. And so be assured of our prayers. Everyone, please get involved, learn more about it. And because it doesn't stop in Wichita, right? There's so many communities that need this kind of education. Again, we're here with Josh Dyson, former headmaster at Classical School of Wichita, and now the executive director of the C5 Urban School Initiative, launching Hope Academy Wichita this fall. Josh, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for all you do, my friend.
Thank you, Soren, for having me. It really has been a joy.